every single one of our major customers and minor customers all shut their doors overnight.
You need the right people in the right place at the right time. And sometimes you have the right people in the right place, but at the wrong time.
I've got to keep going forward. I've got to keep looking for revenue streams. I've got to keep looking for growth, keep looking at new ways of doing things.
But, what's the culture like at the business? What do we stand for, the values?
I've got to tick that box on my personal development program I don't really want to be here.
Scaling up a business isn't easy. If it were, we wouldn't have less than 4% of businesses scaling beyond 10 employees or around £1 million turnover level, and less than 1% beyond 50 employees. But the contribution that we make as owner-managers to our economies is immense and should never be underestimated, yet it can be a tough gig for all of us at times. And only other business owners truly understand the challenges that we face. And through ScaleUp Radio, we aim to help make things a little easier. We interview guests who have been where you are now and may have faced some of the challenges that you are facing. And they offer their thoughts and advice on what has worked for them, as well as what didn't. And we've also combined many of the lessons from these interviews and also through working with hundreds of owner managers over the last 10 years or so into a practical scale-up handbook that we've called the Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System, or ESUS. And it's for owner managers like you and me as we navigate our own scale-up journey. And you can order a copy through your favourite online book retailer or by going to all the W's, esusgroup.co.uk, www.esusgroup.co.uk. On this week's episode of ScaleUp Radio, I talk with George Blakeway, who is the founder and managing director of the Fruitful Group. And the Fruitful Group is a learning and development business which provides leadership and team performance advice and support for all sorts of businesses and helping them with their organisational culture. And they've worked with some very high-performing and high-profile teams. Over time, they've also licensed in and also created their own tools which other learning and development professionals can use in their own coaching and development businesses. And that's become another revenue stream for the business. And the Fruitful Group, which has now been in business for 20 years, is the result of a lifelong passion for George in training and development for managers and for business owners. And after turning down one of the biggest brands in the world, he decided that corporate life wasn't for him and he wanted to be his own boss and follow his dream. And so the Fruitful Group was born. And as always, there's lots of great subjects that we cover, including things like the importance of a good culture within the business without the boss trying to do everything themselves and driving that culture. We talk about the benefit of working with SMEs compared to working with corporates and how working with one can inform your approach to working with the other. And we also talk particularly about what makes a high-performing team and how can you move your company towards that goal of high performance. It's a fantastic discussion. Look forward to seeing what you think of it. Welcome to another episode of ScaleUp Radio. I'm here with George Blakeway, the founder and managing director of the Fruitful Group. So, George, welcome to ScaleUp Radio.
Thank you very much for having me, Kevin.
Yeah, pleasure. So, the Fruitful Group, then, what's that all about?
It's a learning and development business, primarily in two main parts. One is we provide leadership and team performance support for our clients, helping them develop their organizational culture and performance. And then the other half, actually, we've developed part of our business which provides learning and development tools for other learning professionals, either in corporates or they might be independent coaches, facilitators, who are also supporting clients. So we've got another revenue stream in that respect as well.
Brilliant. So I'm certainly looking forward to delving into your expertise around people development and the leadership side of things. So that's going to be really good. So what kind of got you into the business in the first place?
Well, it was really strange. At university many years ago, I wrote a dissertation, and it was called, I've still got it somewhere, Gathering Dust. And it's not very good, I don't think, but it was outdoor training, and it's used to develop managers and teams. I still remember writing it because it's always been an interest of mine, developing teams and managers and leadership. And in particular, this focus was outdoor training. So I've always had a passion for it. But after a sort of a corporate career, I was looking for something a little bit different, and decided to set up my own business in that field. So it was one of those, wasn't really completely planned, but perhaps there was a germ of an idea some time ago that led me here.
So when did you set the business up?
Set it up in 2002, actually. So we've had 20 years at it now.
Very good.
I was working, I'd been working in the oil industry. I'd been working in Coca-Cola for a while. So my sort of corporate career was ticking along very nicely. But I, like many people, got a little bit tired, got a little bit, right, I need something a little bit new. So I took a sabbatical, took a year off, and went traveling, actually. Went traveling around the world, got back, and the job offer was there from Coke. But it just something, I thought, you know what, I need to be my own boss, or I need to work for a much smaller business. So I think that was the moment where I realized that I needed to make a little bit of a change, and it was a good moment to do it, really.
Quite a decision to make. Turn down one of the biggest brands in the world.
Well, yes. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Someone did say to me, "It's just fizzy pop, George," and you know, it is a great brand. And someone else, in fact, the then CEO said, "George, it's just 1% fizzy pop and 99% marketing," which I thought was very true as well. But sometimes we search for, you know, a little bit more satisfaction, autonomy, pride of running something and doing something for yourself or for those around you. And so there's lots of motivators, I think, that were at the right time. And at that point, I wasn't married, I didn't have children. So it was an easier transition, or at least the risk I felt was less, because I didn't have quite the dependence that I now have later in life. So
looking back, was it a good decision to make?
Undoubtedly, the fact that we're still here after 20 years, it's been a fascinating journey, but undoubtedly, I feel that this was something that fits very well with me, and I'm very, very proud where we've got to. So no, I have no regrets from making that decision years ago.
Brilliant. So learning and development can cover quite a lot of things. So can you maybe give us a little bit of an idea of the sort of things that you're doing with clients, and maybe the kind of clients that you're doing them with?
Yeah, because traditionally, I suppose you might think, you know, that sort of sat in a classroom doing some form of training. And whilst there is an element of that sometimes, there is a degree of that. A lot of it is actually coaching and facilitation and unlocking the ability and the expertise of business leaders and teams and individuals. So it can range from training, it can range to coaching, it can range to facilitating a strategic review of a business. It's the wonderful thing is it's when they need some external expertise to help develop the way in which they operate. So less about process, much more about behavior and culture.
Okay, brilliant. I definitely want to come onto that side of things, because that's one of the key challenges, as you well know, in terms of businesses scaling up, isn't it? Is getting that culture right and the behavioural side and enabling people to behave in the way that you'd like them to behave as a business owner.
Well, I think you're dead right. I think when you scale up, inevitably you have to put in potentially more governance and more structure and ensuring that the business operates the way it needs to. But we're often quite good at that. But where we sort of perhaps fall down on is that the boss is still trying to do it all themselves, or there isn't a clarity around how we do stuff around here. Because before, when there's only sort of 2-3 people, it's just, well, guess what? It's just the way we do stuff around here. Suddenly, when you start to have 10, 12, 20, then people kind of want to know, how do we do stuff around here? And you have to be a bit more explicit about what the culture is and what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable and what people want from each other.
Absolutely. So Do you have a particular range of size of businesses that you find are your sweet spot, that you work with more than others?
The vast majority of our clients are big corporates,
right?
And that's the best economic and commercial model for us, is to work with large corporates. We're very lucky. We work with Netflix, Sky, the NHS, the prison service, a real range of fantastic businesses, and that works for us very well. But I have to say, we also get a real buzz from working for some SMEs, because you tend to see the impact of your efforts much clearer.
Yeah.
And so whilst our main focus is working with corporates, actually we do have a number of smaller businesses that we work with that can be incredibly fulfilling and satisfying. And of course, part of our business as well is supporting coaches and learning development professionals with certain tools and support that helps them to do their job. And in many cases, they're independent. They're an individual working for themselves, and so the support we provide there, we can really see the impact of that, because they almost sort of reach out to us because they need that level of support and feeling that they've got someone that they can turn to help them in their business.
And I know from that you've got a number of strands to the business. You mentioned the commercial model. So how do the commercials work within the Fruitful Group?
Yeah, so the kind of the original business is the learning and development business focused around coaching and training and facilitation of leadership and team development. And that still takes up probably a third of the revenue. But about 9 years ago now, we came across an opportunity to distribute a fantastic behavioral tool called Everything Disc. Mm-hmm. And we jumped on that. I suppose the closest way of describing it is almost a franchise model. It's a US-based business called Wiley that own it and distribute it, and we're one of the partners in Europe. We distribute worldwide actually, but our main focus is UK and Europe, and that's been a really interesting addition, and it's probably been a catalyst for us scaling up, to use your language, for growing, because it's suddenly been something that we've been able to scale without the necessarily investment in headcount.
Okay.
The learning and development model, inevitably, if you want to run more coaching sessions or more training sessions, you need more people to do it. Yeah. Now, we have a great internal team, and we also have a great associate team that allows us to do that. But scaling is harder. It's more intensive, and it's harder work. Whereas scaling the business, which is a little bit more about distribution, has been, I wouldn't say easier, because that makes it sound like it's been an easy process. It's been a lot of hard work, but it's been more effective in terms of scaling it. It's been...
and I believe that's given you a degree of recurring revenue as well, hasn't it? The way that operates. Yeah,
absolutely. And that was the key, is in learning and development, you have to almost win new opportunities constantly. It's very, very, once someone's, invested their income or their budget into a leadership program, whilst there might be bits that you continue to do, you broadly kind of need to start again with a different client. Whereas the DISC business, and we've developed another product called Team Performance Scan, that's allowed us to distribute those products on a model that generates that revenue and allows us to scale up, because it is recurring. Once we've got those clients and we provide the support and the benefit, then they just continue to use them.
Yeah, so that was a key turning point, or a milestone in your business end, was but 9 years ago, getting into DISC. Sounds like, and I know you've from what you just said as well, that you've developed Team Performance Scan, so you've then developed your own software. So we'll tease out some of those things. Let's go back to the beginning then, just for the moment, in terms of when you got started. You've now got some very well known clients. You mentioned Sky and Netflix and the prison service and people like that. When you started, how did you get into some of those clients, or how did you get going?
Gosh, that's a good question. I'm just going to cast my mind back. I'd like to say some really clever marketing, but it wasn't. it was actually incredibly hard work in networking and connecting. So because I'd had a reasonably punchy corporate career, I was reasonably well connected. And that was probably my starting point. Like anyone starting a business, you kind of reach out to that, I hate to use the expression, but the low-hanging fruit. And that's what we did. There was no doubt that making those connections were really important. And I'd be lying if I said that the first few years were easy, because, you know, I'm glad I didn't have a big family to support, because it is tough.
Yeah.
But once you've got going, once you've got over that hurdle of just enough income to go, you know what, I can breathe now. I'm okay. I don't feel that tension. Provided you can do a good job, what we were finding was that we were being recommended. Okay. So we used up our initial contact base. And then, of course, 20 years ago as well, the social media wasn't as available to do that. So it was word of mouth. It was being recommended. It was working very hard on connecting to a wider audience.
Very good. And in those early years, then, was that just you essentially on your own to start with?
Yes, it was. I knew I wanted to be part of a team. Probably within 6 months of working on my own, I thought, you know, I'm enjoying this, but I'm missing that kind of, when things go well, you want to share it with someone, and when things don't go so well, you want to share it with someone. And so I quite quickly built a team of associates around me, people that I knew and trusted, and they still work for us 20 years later. So that was something I did relatively quickly, but the benefit was, and one of my ambitions right at the outset was not to build a business that kept me awake at night.
Right.
Now we all know that there's challenges and times when you are kept awake at night. You can't avoid it. But by and large, I didn't want lots of debt. Yeah. And I didn't want a huge payroll where we felt in our industry, and gosh, in the last 2 or 3 years, that's been proved. But for some people claim they predicted it, but most of us didn't. Suddenly when you go into those tough times and you're carrying a large headcount in a very people-intensive business, it's challenging. And even to a certain extent in our business, August and December are always very, very quiet. And to carry a lot of headcount, even in those months, is difficult. So the associate model made sense commercially, but it also made a sense from my own set of, why am I doing this? And that's a bit of advice I think I'd give to anyone looking to scale up is ask yourself why. What's the driver? What is it because it's about income? Is it about actually it makes us more efficient if we can get a little bit larger? Is it about being able to step back a little bit? Because sometimes the larger you are, actually you can start employing people to do your job for you a little bit. But for me, one of it was I don't want to grow for the sake of just income. It needs to be designed in such a way where I still feel confident that we can hurdle any bumps in the road. Okay.
And what's driving you? What really gets you out of bed and drives you to be successful?
But probably my children at the moment. But, I think it's it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but the need to do a really good job drives me. So I typically have no problem working very hard to make sure that the client gets the best possible experience that they can from us. Yeah. The problem with that is I sometimes find that we set ourselves, or I set myself, unreasonable expectations. And we can get into the sort of the danger of either putting too much pressure on ourselves, or in some cases going a little bit too far commercially, and end up kind of going, well, hang on a sec, where's the margin gone on this gig? Because we have to be still firm commercially and negotiate appropriately. But I think the drive comes from wanting to help others and make a difference to what they're trying to achieve.
All right. Brilliant. And you mentioned, that wanting to do a really good job, and you've talked about the associate model, which is a great way of scaling without taking on the overhead. One of the challenges sometimes is managing the quality of the work then across an associate group, isn't it? So how have you managed to address that?
That's a really good question. And because we've grown organically and not too aggressively, it's been quite easy for me to use a core base that I originally knew quite well. And as we've grown that, it tends to be from people I've met or worked with and got to know them. And they might in some cases be a client. And the clients left their organization and actually got into our business, into our field. And we've said, yeah, well, we'd love to try and find some work for you and get you involved. So it's been quite steady. We haven't had to advertise. It's been more about people I've met and connected with. Interestingly, the disc business in the last sort of 3 or 4 years has really helped us because we've been accrediting people to use everything disc. Mm-hmm. And so they've come to us and said, oh, I need to get badged in this behavioral tool so I can use it with my clients. And of course, we've got to know them and thought, wow, these people are good. Mm-hmm. So just particularly more recently, we've been able to increase our associate pool by saying, look, we've got some work which we'd love you to deliver on our behalf because we love what we've seen. And that's helped as well.
Yeah, very good. Very good. And yeah, I think that's a really interesting way of growing the business. If you and some people will then backfill back into the business by employing people. Have you gone down that route, or have you stuck with largely the associate type model?
That's a really, again, it's an interesting one, this, because by and large, associates will cost us more money than a full-time employee, by and large. But very good associates don't typically want to work in an organization like ours full-time because they also appreciate the autonomy and they're probably making a good income as it is, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an interesting one. We have explored taking on less experienced facilitators, but again, it doesn't really quite fit with our brand because it'd be kind of saying, I don't like the idea that someone's going to be working with someone who's not very experienced. So typically the full-time employees we have, and I use the word support staff very carefully because they're much more than support. They effectively run the operation. So they run the operation, the full-time staff. The learning development team are, apart from Heidi and I, are all associates. Having said that, we have just employed someone who starts on November the 3rd, who is a very experienced learning and development professional. But we're bringing them in a senior role, paying them accordingly, and they're going to be responsible for not just facilitating and coaching, but actually helping us drive the business and run the business. So we're bringing someone in a sort of very key role to help us with our next stage of growth.
So you're starting another phase of your journey, essentially, with that new senior hire. Very, very interesting. So let's pick up on that then. Let's see. What are some of the other milestones you'd say in the 20 years you've been running the business that you've either got right, like DISC 9 years ago, or maybe things that, given a bit of hindsight now, you'd say, we got that wrong?
Yes, there was a couple of things. I think there's been a natural evolution, and we've, to start with, we were doing everything we could. We're doing sales training, presentation skills, time management. I mean, literally, sort of, if you had a learning need in your organization, we try and fill it. And that was partly because we were well connected, so we could find the right person, even if perhaps I or one of the other associates wasn't so experienced in that area. The problem is that I think we were spreading ourselves so thin that we didn't really build a reputation for a particular area. Yeah. But now we've got that clarity. Either it's helping other learning professionals use the tools that we have available to them, or we are working on leadership management and team performance. And that's broadly the focus. So I think that's helped just evolve as we got more successful. We could actually afford to specialize more. The other interesting thing that we did was, I'm going to go back a little bit more, probably about 12 years ago, and we partnered up with another organisation. And they won't mind me talking about it. They're a brilliant organisation called Top Banana, and they are a predominantly IT marketing organisation, but they had a training element of their business, and it got a bit stuck. It wasn't really going anywhere. I was building mine. We knew each other very well. In fact, we collaborated on a few projects. So they said, look, why don't we create a business and we'll merge effectively the two organizations, their training arm and my business together. So we did that, and I operated out of down in Farley Hungerford, actually out of what is now the Bath Rugby Club headquarters. We had an office in that old building there, and it was successful. It was great fun, but it was obvious that actually the synergy that we were getting from being together, whilst there were certain things that really helped, like finance and some of the governance behind running a business, the actual growth of the learning and development business wasn't for either party as we'd hoped.
Right.
After about 4 years, 3-4 years, we had a very amicable conversation about whether we were progressing down the right road. And rather than just continue to plod along it, I think what we great opportunity is sort of honesty. We agreed that actually it wasn't the right thing to do, and I think they recognised that, and so did I. So we were able to disengage the business without any issues or any difficulty. And it was interesting. It taught me that whatever decisions we make when we grow a business, or we have to also be prepared to go at some point, you know what, this isn't working. We need to change this. My challenge is knowing the difference between perseverance and no, we need to do something different here. And if only we knew, yes. What's that saying about the courage to do it, but the wisdom to know? Yeah. It's very easy to sort of go, well, fail fast is something that's often, but then you go, but hang on a sec, shouldn't we persevere? Because isn't it about resilience and tenacity and knowing when enough is enough is so important. Same with employing someone, isn't it? You employ someone, and it's, how early do you make the decision on this isn't working? Is it just because you haven't persevered or spent enough time with them, developing them, or given them enough of a chance? Or is it actually, no, I'm really sorry, but it's a round peg in a square hole, and this isn't going to work? And knowing the difference is so important. It is.
It's a really difficult thing, isn't it? Because as you say, there's an element with perseverance, which is if you take away the safety net, you're going to have to make it work anyway. So you'll find a way to make it work. But also, as you say, you just don't know whether you're just around the corner. Or there's that cartoon, isn't there, of the miner with a pickaxe trying to break through the mountain or make his tunnel or whatever else, and he gives up just before he literally would have broken through. There's that sort of thing. You just don't know. So
no, you don't. But also, I think the danger is I know I read an interesting article at the weekend about the latest military battle tank that is in the design phase. And anyone who's been in procurement in defence knows that, most projects last about 20 years from idea to actually, being able to drive the thing. And that's an incredibly long period of time because it's kind of almost potentially out of date by the time you've got to the. But they've tried to shorten that as much as they can. And the problem is they've got a battle tank that has cost so far $4 billion out of a projected budget of 5.9, and it's not working. It's just not fit for purpose. Yeah. But of course, they've spent $4 billion. So do they pull the plug and waste $4 billion? But the fact is they're kind of thinking, we've spent this much, we might as well carry on. And that's still another $1.9 billion they could possibly waste.
That's the sunk cost mentality, isn't it? Which actually is irrelevant really, but it's not on the way you think. That technology thing, absolutely. I remember being in the RAF, and I think it was at Bryce Norton. There was a hangar full of 15 Tornadoes that had just come off the production line, and they were in for modifications because essentially some of the tech was about 15 years old that had been built into it that they had to. Well,
it was great because I spent some time in the army when I left school, and you'd often get kit delivered, and it's we were just about to go to the desert, and it was all green, and you go, oh, hang on, this is the wrong kit, and then just when they've actually got you the sort of the light brown stuff, then you're off somewhere else, and it's like, oh, come on, guys, just try and keep up. Yeah. All
right. Good. So really interesting. So yeah, you managed to work your way amicably out of that arrangement then. So very good. Any other milestones with looking back?
No, I think the main one was this additional revenue stream, which and the story about discovering it was very strange because I'd gone to an exhibition, and one of our clients, Wiley, was exhibiting at, it was a learning and development exhibition, and they were exhibiting there. I was thinking, that's strange because Wiley were a publisher, so perhaps they're publishing some books, particularly around learning and development. And I went to the stand, and they were looking for a learning development partner to distribute these tools in the UK. And if it wasn't for that moment, who's to know whether we would have ended up there? So was it luck? Was it the fact that I made the effort to go to an exhibition with an open mind? And so all these little moments of being a boss, I think it's so important to keep your head up and keep looking around you and keep exploring. If you're constantly looking inside your business and trying to correct everything that isn't being done exactly the way you want it to be done, or you're walking around metaphorically playing with the machines, physically playing with the machines in some cases, there's a danger that you're possibly not doing that bit of your role, which I would call the leadership role, which is looking up and looking out and looking beyond. And I think that's so important.
I think that's really, really key. And it goes as well with what you said earlier about in the early days, not being completely clear about what it is you stood for and spreading yourself a little bit thin. Once you've then focused and this is what we're about, I believe that when you're more likely to spot opportunities that fit in with that, because you'll be on the lookout. You'll be thinking, how do we be even better at this? And when you spot something, you'll instantly be able to go, that fits in perfectly. There's a gap we've got that slots into it brilliantly. Whereas if you're doing so many things, it's much harder to know which ones are the ones that really you should be going for.
I agree. And someone told me a wonderful story that the danger we have as bosses sometimes is that we come up with the latest idea, we come up with another initiative, and this happens in corporate life massively. So there's the board or the senior exec or a management team in an SME come up with some ideas. Great, we'll do this, and they introduce another initiative, another idea, another project. And someone said to me, it's a bit like the marathon. If you go to the London Marathon, you've got the elite runners, and they set off at the start, and off they go, and they're charging around the course. And right at the back is the guy dressed in the banana suit and the armadillo and stuff. And the elite runners are running down the mile to finish. By the time the bananas are still trotting around Greenwich, like 3 miles in. And the analogy is that sometimes as senior teams or as bosses, we're thinking about the next thing when most of the staff are still trying to get their head around the last thing. And they're not ready yet. They haven't even started the race really, but we're already talking about the next race. Yeah. And that's the danger. I think we just need to not throw too much at our people when they're still trying to get their head round the last thing we asked them to do differently.
Very interesting.
I think they got to be careful, mindful of that.
So let's dig into that a little bit more now. Obviously, with your expertise, you're working with teams and high performance teams trying to get the most out of teams all the time. So what are some of the big challenges that you're seeing that hold teams back?
I think in the last 2 or 3 years, we have seen teams fragment even more. So for those organisations that are slightly larger, they, through working from home, through geographical spread, through COVID, through perhaps an increased use of Zoom and Teams, we've seen that little bit of disconnection. And so that's something that we think is very valuable in terms of being able to operate from home and to be able to operate using technology. We've also recognised that that's created a few issues around building trust, building relationship, building that time to really be a bit more innovative or just think or just share stuff and let ideas bounce around that you would be doing if you were bumping into each other on the shop floor or in the corridor or in the canteen. So I think we've been trying to help organisations think about those things more recently, and we've become more complex. Everything's more complex. Everything's the words VUCA are often mentioned: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and we have to cope with that a great deal more now. And we can't, I think, as leaders, always give people the answers because we don't necessarily know them. Sometimes we don't even know what the question is. And I think there's a little bit of just helping organisations give as much clarity as they possibly can, but recognising that it's okay to be operating with 90% rather than 100% of the knowledge that perhaps ordinarily would have existed.
Very interesting. And I mean, you've worked with some really high performers. You've got a wonderful photograph behind you of one of the. Is it an America's Cup yacht or?
That's so. This gets me a chance to talk about my holiday snaps. That's the Clipper race yacht, Halong Bay.
Right.
I took part 2 years ago in the round the world yacht race.
Okay.
So I'm working with, as I say, fortunately, I'm working with lots of wonderful teams, like McLaren Formula One team and a few organisations, helping them be the best they can be. But it'd been a while since I'd put myself in that situation myself. Brilliant. So I jumped on the boat a couple of years ago and raced from London down to Uruguay as part of that experience
very good
to see what it was like. Yeah,
I imagine that was a fantastic experience. So I was using that as a kind of a segue into what to you defines a high performing team, because you've worked with McLaren and I guess Ferrari might disagree with you, but they're obviously one of the top performing sports teams. So what defines a high performing team for you? What makes one?
It's one of those ones which we typically ask at the start of the session is let's talk about the characteristics that they recognise they need in their environment to perform at their best. So each team and each environment is slightly different, but broadly there tends to be some consistencies across those things. And the research we did and the conversations we had actually led to us building this tool called Team Performance Scan, which takes 10 themes. So we identified 10 themes that we felt had to be present in a team for it to perform very well. And they ranged from things that were a bit more process oriented. So like thinking about plans, execution, systems, clarity, and things like that. But also the behavioral side to it. So much more around thinking about areas such as trust, communication, respect, openness, conflict. Conflict is one for us because we like the idea of cognitive diversity. And what I mean by that is people disagreeing because they see it differently. Yeah. And they might approach solving a problem from a different perspective, or they might have a different view of it. And actually, if you can get teams in a space of trust and in a space of actually having the interests of everyone and the team at the forefront rather than one's individual interests. If you can get to that point, it's great because you can have some real debate and some real disagreement, but in a really positive sense. And that tends to lead to better decisions because you've debated it, but it also tends to lead to people that are on the bus because they've kind of felt part of the process. So those are some of the things that we really try and help teams do. A lot of it boils down to trust. A lot of it boils down to, do I feel that I can trust you, not just to do what I ask you to do, but that I can be honest and open with you without fear of repercussion.
Yeah, and Google defines it psychological safety, and it's that sort of thing, isn't it? Yeah,
it is. And there's lots of things that says that some of the big disasters could have been avoided if there'd been greater psychological safety, if it had been okay for an employee to challenge their boss and for that to be challenged upwards, that perhaps people would have listened and we could have avoided some unfortunate situations.
So how do we, if we're running a business and we're not sure that we've got that within our teams, what's one or two things maybe we could do? Where do we start to try and improve that?
I think I'd always start with, and I sometimes do this at the start of a meeting with a team, is I ask people to write down what the collective purpose is of the group in the room. So what joins them all together? What's the sort of the glue? And for some people, they write down the sort of mission statement of the organisation, which is fine, but that's not necessarily what really connects that group of people together. So I would be making sure that people understand the goal of the organisation. What are we all here to do? And then that often leads down into, so we've got that clarity of vision. What does that mean that I do? What's my role in contributing to that? And once we kind of go, why am I here? What does that mean to me? Then we start to get a bit more buy-in and a bit more sort of connection. So a lot of the work we'll do is about not just the behaviour, but making sure people have got clarity behind why they're there and what they need to do to contribute to that why.
Brilliant, good. So that led you into all of that work with DISC and the work you're doing in college led you into then developing team performance scan. So that's a piece of software that you've conceived and had developed and written for yourself. I imagine that took a fair bit of investment. How did you go about funding that?
It did, and it was probably the bravest thing we've done, is to be honest, because everything else we've done has been quite organic and quite measured. This did take some investment, not just in terms of the software cost of developing the app, but the time. And I think we had to factor that in as well. So, but it was something that we felt that it gives us the opportunity of another revenue stream, but it also gave us the credibility that we have something that was invented here. Yeah. And we felt there was a gap. There was a noticeable gap in the market for a product that was affordable, but collected data that was really useful to help coach leaders and teams to be better. And yeah, it was. I remember sort of talking through the rest of the team about what I wanted to spend. And whilst I might be the managing director, I wouldn't have done it unless I felt the team was behind this. And there was a little bit of, because there's psychological safety, there was some challenge. There was some, well, hang on a sec. Can we afford it? What does it do? How is it going to work? How long is it going to take to get a return? The more we debated it, the more we felt that this was something that, whilst isn't going to happen quickly, is going to grow and be a wonderful addition to the portfolio of products that we can offer our learning and development professionals and coaches.
Brilliant. And for anybody else thinking of developing their own software, what advice with hindsight might you give them?
Well, we were very lucky. We found a really good developer. And I have to say that was crucial. Right. So, and it was, you know what? I asked around, and someone recommended someone, and I met them up with them for a lunch and a chat, and just connected. There was a proper kind of feeling of trust and feeling that, we weren't going to be working with someone that we didn't feel confident with. And that's really made all the difference. Having a very good software developer that was flexible, that challenged us. Again, there were times when he said, I'm not sure this is the right route. And that gave us the opportunity to stop and revisit it. There's people out there that are much more experienced than me in terms of the software area and developing apps. There goes the dog again, excuse me. That's been part of that kind of journey. But for us, it's been a very good experience.
Very good. All right. So one or two questions just to wrap up. You've just taken on the senior person for your next stage in your development with the business. So if I'm fortunate enough to have you on as a guest in 5 years' time, George, what would count as success for you over those 5 years?
Oh, well, that's quite easy to answer. Semi-retired.
Okay.
Well, and that doesn't sound ambitious, does it? But it's interesting. I will judge success, I think, we'll have got the business to the point where the people working in it don't need us on a daily basis. And so we're at the sufficient scale and the operation is sufficiently robust that I can pursue a few other interests as well as run the business. So that's kind of a very, very personal place. For the business in 5 years' time, I think it's continuing to develop a solution that you could continue to operate without investing huge amounts in either personnel or borrowing money. And I totally understand why it's important to borrow money to get businesses going and to grow them. So I'm not for any minute suggesting that those that have are going down the wrong route. But as I'm approaching my semi-retirement, I don't want to have those sleepless nights that I spoke about at the start.
Brilliant. Good. And something I like to ask everybody, if you were to go back to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
I think I'd still give it to myself now, which is set very high standards and go for it, but don't beat yourself up all the time. Because things happen, and it's how you deal with it is more important than it happening in the first place, because some things you cannot avoid happening. And whereas perhaps in my earlier career, I was so worried about doing a perfect job. Yeah. And actually, you just, there's too many variables in our, you can't keep everyone happy all the time because we're all so different. So if I've got a room full of 10 people, I cannot keep all 10 happy all the time. And that's okay. You just, most people, as long as you're doing a good job, that's fine. So there'd be a little bit of work hard, do the very best you can for your clients. But at the same point, don't set impossible standards for yourself, because you'll just cause yourself anxiety, and that won't help in the long run.
Brilliant. Very good. And any podcasts, apps, tools, things that you found really useful in your business? Obviously, we've mentioned DISC and obviously Team Performance Scan that you developed yourself, but any apps or software or things that you found a particularly useful resource?
I don't think so. I tend to kind of read reasonably widely, but I don't tend to read lots of textbooks. I enjoyed your book. I thought that very practical. So what I love is reading stuff that's kind of a bit more practical. There's a pragmatic side to it, or a good story. And sometimes when you read a good story, you learn a lot from it as well. Just kind of the messages in it. So that would be, I think, probably keep your eyes and ears open all the time and talk to people just as we are. I think there's so much that you can learn from other people, whether it's their successes or whether they've had a failure that they've learned from, and that's all life is, isn't it?
Absolutely. Try not to repeat everybody else's mistakes if you can. Or certainly repeat your own mistakes more than once. Yeah. Good. So it's been wonderful talking to you, George, and really appreciate your time and your insights. If people would like to get hold of you, the Fruitful Group, or find out more about Team Performance Scan, for example, what's the best way for them to do that?
Probably the easiest way is to jump onto the website www.thefruitfulgroup.com, and then there'll be a couple of websites there that you can be directed to depending on what sort of support or interest you've got. We'd be delighted to have conversations with people.
Fantastic. George, thank you very much for being my guest today.
Pleasure, Kevin.
Don't forget to take a look at www.bizsmarts.co.uk to access a great range of resources to help you in your scale-up journey. So that's bizsmarts.co.uk, which is bizsmarts.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.